Hey guys, we're going to talk about the reform era here. Just to show you some vocab, reform means to change something in hopes of making it better. So when you reform something, you're changing it so you can make it better. Now here's some reasons for the reform era. Reason number one, with more population because of the Industrial Revolution, remember you have more people moving in from other countries and you have more people moving from the farm into the cities. With more population, you really have more problems because the more people get closer and more compact together, you have some issues that come out of that. The second reason the Reform era started was what was called the Second Great Awakening. Now, this is when Americans really start to begin to care more about each other because they realize that God cares about them. So the Second Great Awakening is about more people believing in God because preachers would go from town to town saying that God loved them and cared for them and made them special, which means that they realized that they needed to start caring for each other a little bit more because God cared for them. So let's look at some of the reform movements or groups that wanted to make change. Movement number one was called the Temperance Movement. The whole goal of the Temperance Movement was to make drinking alcohol illegal because a lot of the people in the Temperance Movement believed that alcohol was the cause of poverty or violence. So, temperance means drinking alcohol and the needing to stop it or the abuse of alcohol, drinking too much. They wanted to stop that. The education movement was all about creating free elementary education for all social classes. What social classes means is that Horace Mann wanted to create elementary education for the rich and for the poor, all the same, all at the same place. Because before Horace Mann came along, only the wealthy and the rich could afford an education. So Horace Mann wanted to make free education because he believed all people deserved education. Prison and the mentally ill movement. Dorothy Dix was the one who led this. She went to a prison in Boston. When she went to that prison in Boston, she realized quite a few things. She realized that children and adults were put in the same prison. She realized that people who owed as little as $10 were in jail for years and years. And she realized that people with mental illness that had some type of mental disease that they couldn't help were treated really badly in prisons, and they were put in prison because there was really nowhere else to put them. There was no hospital, there was no care center for them. So she wanted to change all this, to change the conditions so that people were treated better even if they were put into prison. The women's movement. The women's movement in the Reform era was all about gaining equal rights for women. You got to know that back then, at this time, women weren't treated the same as men. Women didn't really have jobs. Women couldn't work in politics. Women couldn't have a government job. Women couldn't even vote in town meetings or anything like that. Women couldn't even speak in a town meeting most of the time. So women were not treated fairly or equally, and they wanted to be treated better. They wanted to have a voice in the government and in the country. So your leaders of the women's right movement was Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These three ladies, one of the main things they did is they went around speaking about women's rights, and they also organized a meeting called the Seneca Falls Convention. Now, the reason it's called that is because the meeting was in Seneca Falls, New York, okay? And you know, convention means meeting. So it was a meeting talking about how do we get women their rights. At this meeting, at the Seneca Falls Convention, they write a document called the Declaration of Sentiments that's supposed to be kind of like the Declaration of Independence. So they take words from the Declaration of Independence and they change them to add women. So here's an example. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. In the Declaration of Independence, it just says that all men are created equal. But in the Declaration of Sentiments, the women want their rights, and they say that all men and women should be created equal. So at the Seneca Falls Convention, they write the Declaration of Sentiments, and they want their equal rights as men and women together. The abolitionist movement. The whole goal of this movement was to make slavery illegal. People who were abolitionists hated slavery. They think it shouldn't exist. They think it should not be a part of the United States. Because they're thinking, how could America call itself the land of the free, but yet still have slavery? And I quite agree with them. So some of your abolitionist leaders, you have Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe was an author, and she wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. This book told a terrible story of a slave and how badly the slave was treated. And this made people in the North join the abolitionist movement and want slavery to be stopped. Your second abolitionist leader is Frederick Douglass. He was an escaped slave, he was a speaker and a writer, and he started a newspaper called the North Star to get people to want to stop slavery. Your third leader here is Harriet Tubman. She was an escaped slave, but she didn't stay just in freedom. She went back into the slave territories and helped people escape through the Underground Railroad. Now remember this. The Underground Railroad is not a railroad track, it's not a train, and it's not even underground. All the Underground Railroad means is a group of houses and trails and pathways and people that would help you get to freedom. So it was just a code name for a way to get to freedom. Another abolitionist leader was William Lloyd Garrison. He was the first white abolitionist. So he's the first one to join the cause and want slavery to be ended. And he ran an abolitionist newspaper to help spread the word how bad slavery was. Our last abolitionist leader, Sojourner Truth. She was an escaped slave, she was a speaker for women's rights, and she was against slavery. Now, something else besides the reform movements, during this time period there was something called transcendentalism. Now, all that transcendentalism means is that there was more focus put on art, literature, and music. So in this movement, there were quite a bit of great writers that came out of this, such as Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Some really great music came out of this. Some great scientists came out of this. So it was more so of a time where people stopped just thinking about farming or living or making money, and they started to think about the arts, like art, writing, and music. And this included, the next slide, the art movement, a school called the Hudson River School. So this was the very first school that was created that was all about just doing art. And the main thing that they focused on was art that was centered around nature. So when they painted, they didn't just paint people, they painted landscapes. They painted the beauty of America, which really started to create inside of people this desire to start moving westward and exploring, because they realized how beautiful the United States was and how beautiful the world was. So this is the Hudson River School, and it was all about art. Now, all these slides, this is all about the reform movement and the changes that needed to happen in the United States so that the United States would become a better place.